I give you the time. 10:15, exactly 10:15 p.m. Sorry. Terrorists, aka bandits, they came to Aboki community. This community, they under a ward, you understand, a ward of its own. But they under Jega local government area of Kebbi State. Nigerians, you know the story. Even they hide them, the English and Hali go they bring them out. I did very active. The federal government of bandits me, they no go tell me these things. But like I always tell you, I got your back. As they hide them, like Alhaji go bring them out. Nigerians.
I would never tell anybody don't go and register to vote. But I'm also realistic. Voters don't decide elections in Nigeria. Citizens don't decide elections in Nigeria. Judges do. I'll be responsible if I do not say that. I'm above the average life expectancy of a male Nigerian. So I'm in borrowed time day. If you fix elections in 16th of January, you're telling Igbos who go from where they live, you must not come back. Because if you do, you're in trouble. You're making a fundamental structural point about ethnic participation in the voting. And as I said, people are going to slate me for what I've just said. But what you're telling, because
I had an interview here, a program with you here, where I said, if I had my way, two people would not run in 2027. They will not run at all. President Tinubu and Vice President Atiku.
Now, a new United Nations assessment is raising fresh concerns about the evolving threat posed by terrorist groups across Nigeria and West Africa. The warning comes as Nigeria continues to battle Boko Haram, ISWAP, and a growing network of armed groups operating across its borders. The report highlights how terrorists are becoming more sophisticated, exploiting porous borders, organized crime, and illicit arms networks to strengthen their operation.
Yes, today we have some things we want to show you concerning the situation in Nigeria. Yes, we've been saying this thing about local, protection against these terrorist bandits. It's not easy, but it can still work out. Yes, something happened in Kebbi State, that's the Jega area, where the locals, that's the vigilantes, we are the people that stopped these bandits, and some of them were killed. Yes, these are the things that we are preaching, and all the communities around should have these active vigilantes and have a synergy among them. Among the various towns, there will be synergy among them. This is a way to show that we are working together and also to give more strength in case of attack. Usually this attack happens in the night. That is according to the chart of what we are getting is usually in the night. So when this thing occur, if there are blockages in different towns on different major routes, may they come past now, you see that they will not succeed. So this one is coming from Jega, that area that this one happened, and they couldn't succeed, though they have one casualty among the vigilantes, but these guys were roasted. They completely roasted. Well, we are starting with this, and I will tell you that anybody that is fixing an election second week of January, invariably is saying that he don't want Igbos to participate in election. That is what we are saying. We have different nations in Nigeria, one country, and we fail to recognize these things and let people be free and live their life. Well, let's start with what happened in Jega. Everyday problem, everyday banditry, everyday kidnapping. Let's start with that.
Nigerians, good news. I say good news. Now every time when I come here to the people bad news, you know that good news. Nigerians, you know the story. If they hide out, the English Alhaji will bring them out. Everybody to Iyeremegi no wa, Iyeremegi, Mangi Mandio to Gio. Iyeremegi, Ajomo, Iyeremegi no wa, Iyeremegi, Mangi Mandio to Gio. Iyeremegi, na so, Nigerians. If you never see where they bomb bandit alive, go to my Telegram. If you never see where they bomb bandit, where they set bandit on fire, go to my Telegram. Guys, yesterday, the 21st of July, 2026, in the evening, around 10:15 p.m. See, do I take you the time? 10:15, exactly 10:15 p.m. Sorry. Terrorists, aka bandits, they came to Aboki community. This community, they under a ward, you understand, a ward of its own. But they under Jega local government area of Kebbi State. Nigerians, you know the story. Even they hide them, the English Alhaji, go they bring them out. I did very active. The federal government of bandits me, they no go tell me these things. But like I always tell you, I got your back. As they hide them, like Alhaji go bring them out. Nigerians, type congratulations there first. Put congratulations, type on for the comments. Say congratulations to the local vigilante men of Aboki community. Type on there. Type on there. Broski, as these guys come, 10:15 p.m., they open fire. They unalive one bricklayer. His name na Musa. Oh, may his soul rest in perfect peace. As they unalive him, they try to kidnap one of the most guys. That the man be the most successful man for that community. Big man, oh, Alhaji Tuku. Alhaji, the one kidnap Alhaji Tuku. Message come pass, information, signal come go enter, like signal come pass to the local vigilante men. The men follow. You see what they tell us? Say, make una equip this vigilante men. Give them better ammunition. You see this security, this insecurity, it could be the thing of the past. Give them equipment, better machine gun. Insecurity could be the thing of the past in Nigeria. I swear to my grandfather grave. As these guys, signal reach to those local vigilante men, those guys pull head. As they come, Broski, for good 1 hour, they exchange gunfire. Four bandits went down. 4! Go to my Telegram. If you never get the link to my Telegram before, like you are new on this my page, you go under the comment section of this video. That is, if you're watching from Facebook, go under the comment section. I'll pin the link there. You find the link to my Telegram there. Click. It's going to take you to my Telegram. If you're watching from Instagram, you go to the bio. The link to my Telegram is there. If you're watching from YouTube, you go under the comment section. The link to my Telegram is there. Go there and see what these guys did to this bandits. They buy them, they set their body ablaze. They burn their body. That's all. They unalive them, they still set the body ablaze. Local vigilante men of Aboki community. Nigerians, type congratulations there. You know, easy. I say, you know, easy. I say, empower these vigilante men. Give them more ammunition, not just more. Give them a better and better one. Bye. They catch 2 alive. 2 alive. 2 there with them right now. 2 they alive now. 4 down. Set on fire. Go my Telegram, broski. Ekwensu iye me. I will not forget how to sing. Ekwensu iye remegi no. Don't get aware. Ekwensu iye remegi no wa. Iye remegi. Mangi mandi otugi o. Iye remegi. Ajomo iye remegi no wa. Iye remegi. Mangi mandi otugi o. Iye remegi. Na so.
All right, I tell you that everything has solution except death. Once there is commitment towards getting the solution must surely come. Yes, rather it will take some time. Well, you've seen what happened in that location. But you see, like I previously said, Odenkalo, I'm going to show you what he said. He's saying it openly, and very few people will tell you this kind of truth in Nigeria today. He is saying that you cannot fix election second week of January. Second week, the Igbos, you know, these serious-minded Igbos, these are the time that they have their occasions. Many of us are still in our villages. So I don't know the plan of people that wants to fix election January. And there is a second thing to that. You know, people will now come out to do this voting, and finally the judiciary will be the one to decide. Oh yes, judiciaries, finally, they are the one to decide what happens. And where the judiciaries have been built, houses, giving cars and everything, what do you expect? What judgment do you expect them to deliver? Well, let's hear Odenkalo, what he's saying in that regards.
I'll be responsible if I do not say that. I'm above the average life expectancy of a male Nigerian. So I'm in borrowed time. day. If you fix elections in 16th of January, you're telling Igbos who go from where they live, you must not come back. Because if you do, you're in trouble. You're making a fundamental structural point about ethnic participation in the voting. And as I said, people are going to slate me for what I've just said. But what you're telling, because you see, if you are an Igbo person, living in, say, Kano, or living in Kaduna, or living in Mayobelwa, or living in Lagos, and you go home for Christmas, correct? Or New Year, and you start traveling back on the 11th, register to vote in those places, to vote on the 16th. You're stupid.
Economically?
No. You're playing with your life. When you fix elections on 16th of January in Nigeria, you're actually making a profound structural point about electoral participation. Okay? When you fix now the issue here, and I want to be very straightforward in saying this. I know people are going to slate me for what I'm about to say, but I'll be responsible if I do not say that. I'm above the average life expectancy of a male Nigerian, so I'm in borrowed time. Okay? Now, what was the issue that led to fixing elections on 16th of January? That Ramadan next year is going to, that if you did it in February, Ramadan will fall in the month of Ramadan, right? Now, Ramadan next year is likely to be 7th or 8th, beginning about 7th or 8th of February, in all likelihood, if you go and read your numbers. Between 16th of January and the end of the beginning of the second week of February, you've got 3 weeks. Now, if you move the onset of elections to the end of January, it's a significant difference from the middle of January. In this country, as it is today, if you fix elections in 16th of January, you're telling Igbos who go from where they live, you must not come back. Because if you do, you're in trouble. You're making a fundamental structural point about ethnic participation in the voting. And as I said, people are going to slate me for what I've just said. But what you're telling, because you see, if you are an Igbo person, living in, say, Kano, or living in Kaduna, or living in Mayobelwa, or living in Lagos, and you go home for Christmas, correct? Or New Year, and you start traveling back on the 11th, register to vote in those places, to vote on the 16th, you're stupid.
Economically?
No. You're playing with your life. It's not an economic thing. It is, and this takes us back to where we started in this interview, quite interestingly. This takes us back to the question of belonging and state legitimacy and the construction of a Nigerian identity, a country in which everybody belongs and in which everybody can count.
But he's not the only Igbo person that traveled during Christmas.
No, I'm sorry. There is a peculiar transhumance of Igbos, just as there is a peculiar transhumance of cattle rearers during the Catholic Great Season. All right? Now, and it's the same thing. So what you're saying is this. The Igbos who are registered to vote where they are living, all of them will go home for Christmas and New Year. None of them will return until after the elections in February. That's one. Two, if you have Northerners in particular, from particularly Northeast and Northwest, in all of the places, most places in the South, most of them will go home ahead of Christmas and New Year. They will not return until February. That says something about our approach to nation building. I would never tell anybody, don't go and register to vote. But I'm also realistic. Voters don't decide elections in Nigeria. Citizens don't decide elections in Nigeria. Judges do. The judges decide elections in deals, backroom deals with politicians. That means the politicians are now self-interested in who becomes a judge. In the Nigerian system, the opposite of credible is incredible. So we now are coming up with these truly incredible candidates or nominees as judges. And the worse or more venal a person is, the more you have over them, to be able to control them or dictate to them, the more amenable and the more likely they are to become judges. To become a successful politician, you need to have a judge in your bedroom. If it is not your bedroom of marriage, it's your bedroom with a side chick. So you now have wives and concubines and children, all of them making up a majority of the new appointments that are going into the judiciary. When Zainab Bukachua was president of the Court of Appeal, APC quickly nominated her husband to become a senator. Where is she now? Where are they? She's left the Court of Appeal, and what has happened? The husband is irrelevant. And that's the same husband who went to the Senate to celebrate how he was doing things in the bedroom with his wife to, arrange judgments on behalf of for the benefit of his colleagues, correct? Their daughter is a judge. The ruling of 26th of June is manifestly corrupt. And my question is, do these judges actually write the judgments for themselves? Peter Lifu, to the knowledge of anyone who has been to his court, is not well. He is recovering from what appears to have been an aneurysm. That's a stroke. He's got a partial paralysis. Ask anybody who has seen him. How does he write a 103-page judgment? I will not go beyond that. But I think it is important for us to start asking very brutal, honest questions. How is a judge who is barely able to function write a 103-page judgment? Like, seriously. Now, let me also be perfectly clear. There are very honest judges still in Nigeria. I think it is important to say that. So I'm not sitting down here saying every judge is corrupt. And that is why I do not say that. I focus on specific examples of manifest corruption on the record, because those should not happen. And when they do, they tarnish the judges who are trying to do their work properly and who are making good effort in a bad system to try to live true to their conscience, to their profession, to their judicial oath, and to the law. And we've got to continue to find ways of encouraging those people without endangering them, particularly while they are still in service in a system that does not like people who are upright.
And some people still have different opinion when it comes to that election. I don't know why we always refuse to tell ourselves the truth. Somebody that should go and rest and allow people that are grounded in something to lead and salvage, deliver people that are impoverished. They say no. Well, God pass everybody. That is it. One day, God go show wetin make am be God for this world. Let's be going. Let's hear from what this Baba is saying concerning, his own thinking. He's saying that Atiku and Tinubu shouldn't run at all and allow this race for others. He's a northerner. You may know him. I think Buba. I think his name is Buba also. Let's watch him.
I had an interview here, a program with you here, where I said, if I had my way, two people would not run in 2027. They will not run at all. President Tinubu and Vice President Atiku. Then you have a really good chance of giving Nigerians a choice to pick the best candidate. The reason why President Tinubu shouldn't run, I think, is that he's run out of steam. I don't think that he has the capacity to continue to govern this country beyond 2027. I'm speaking honestly without any prejudice to him. I think he's fulfilled his ambition. He had become president of this country. By 2027, he would have served 4 years. It would have been the best time for President Tinubu to say, I need a younger person. I need a healthier person. I need somebody who is more focused on governance. And for Vice President Atiku, the same thing. They really owe this country the responsibility to say, we don't have to be presidents in 2027. The country needs a fresh blood. The country needs a new lease of life. We're the wrong people to provide it. I know I'm talking, it sounds crazy, but this is honestly what would have been the best thing. So, you have President Tinubu as a person.
Seems almost impossible.
Well,
because
I know.
Right, and these men that you're talking about, yet ideally, if you say this, politically speaking, in some sense, but almost impossible to tell Bola Tinubu, don't run in 2027. I tell Atiku, don't run in 2027.
Well, but it doesn't stop us from saying it. Sometimes the most impossible things are the best correct things as well. You'll be in your late 70s, 80s, whatever. You're challenged by so many things. And the country is becoming increasingly more and more difficult to govern. Anyway, the point I'm making is, if our politicians have the right appropriate levels of patriotism and commitment, both of them can become incredibly powerful. Vice President Atiku, for instance, if he steps aside, he has the historic opportunity of becoming quite possibly a lot bigger, more powerful than the president. His candidate could win if he is not the candidate. For instance, just for the sake of argument, let's say he picks Tambuwal or Obi and says he will run for us and he would win for us against Amechi. All of you, I will step down. That's my sacrifice. In return, I want you to support him and support him as his number two. And we will rally the country around these people and we will defeat APC. And they campaign really hard. They combine the North and the South and say, this is it. Vote. And know that doesn't necessarily guarantee the country will be run better. Buhari has taught us a lot of lessons. One of Atiku's biggest liability is that being Northern is not good enough. This is unfortunately the poor record that Buhari left behind. People played the Northern card for 8 years. President Buhari left a...
Well, you have heard him. That is Baba Ahmed. He said his mind, and I believe he has spoken the minds of many. Well, let me leave you with this so that you'll be updated with the situation that is happening in Nigeria. Watch this and watch it with keen interest. You will get so many things about the current things happening in this country today.
Now, a new United Nations assessment is raising fresh concerns about the evolving threat posed by terrorist groups across Nigeria and West Africa. The warning comes as Nigeria continues to battle Boko Haram, ISWAP, and a growing network of armed groups operating across its borders. The report highlights how terrorists are becoming more sophisticated, exploiting porous borders, organized crime, and illicit arms networks to strengthen their operations. For Nigeria, the challenge is no longer just about confronting terrorists on the battlefield. Groups are increasingly using drones, technology, kidnapping, and other criminal activities to expand their reach and finance their operations. And as the security threat becomes more complex, the question is whether Nigeria's counter-terrorism strategy is evolving quickly enough to keep pace. Because the battle against insecurity may no longer be simply about having more troops or more weapons, but about having better intelligence, stronger regional cooperation, and the ability to stay one step ahead. Well, General Anthony Atulagbe, a distinguished Nigerian military officer and former force commander of the African Military Intervention Mission in Sudan, he also served as theater commander of Operation Safe Haven, where he played a key role in Nigeria's efforts to tackle insecurity. Glad to have you join me on Prime Time.
Thank you. Good evening, viewers.
Well, straight out.
I was sector commander in...
sector commander?
In Darfur, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's addition to this ones I mentioned.
No, not force commander. I'm just correcting.
Oh, sector commander in Darfur. Okay. Sorry about that little mix-up. All right. Well, straight out, what's your direct and immediate response to the UN report on terrorists using drones, crypto, I mean, of all things, to strengthen operations in Nigeria and, of course, the Sahel?
Okay. The report actually highlights a lot of areas.
Yeah.
It talks about the geographical spread, that they are kind of spreading more into the West Africa and Sahel. And also that most of the ISIS-led operations, 80% of them now are within the Sahel and West Africa. And then he went further to now start talking about how they are using drones and then how they are using AI. There was a researcher by name Greg Klein who wrote a report for France 24, that's France 24. And she stated there that she had interactions with both the active ISWAP and Boko Haram fighters and the ones that have left the theater. And in their interactions, they told her how they had taken advantage of using AI to further improve their operations. And that they even went further to find out that in an operation where they usually deploy like 200 terrorists, that they could use just 60 people and then use AI to determine where to strike and have maximum effect on the troops that they are fighting against. So there were so many findings that she came up with, but then these are areas that perhaps our troops will need to start picking up from. They are, on the side of our own troops, I am aware that even the intelligence cell that is within some of our theaters, they are now AI-led, such that you can take footages of maybe a drone takes a footage of a particular area where troops are sitting or perhaps operating. It comes back with it. The AI can tell you the level of weaponry that is within the area and the level of counter-action that you can take. So also is the procurement of drones. And I think maybe as we progress with the discussion, then I'll be able to highlight some of the other areas.
What you've said is quite interesting. I mean, someone said when they go high, we go higher, or when they go low,
exactly.
we go high.
Exactly.
The question then is, if they can operate at that level with such intelligence, isn't the government of the day and security agencies capable of upgrading their systems to counter what these people are doing?
Okay, so just like, just going by your statement now, you now see how our own military, they are trying to, not just trying, that in fact, it's actually in place in the theater now, that you have counter actions by drones and other, like use of jammers. Because in the theater, we have a little section of electronic warfare team who are supposed to dominate the electromagnetic spectrum to make sure that communication is jammed, you are able to intercept their radios. But then you saw recently that they arrested some of them and found Starlink with them. So that Starlink is to evade the regular communication, which can be jammed by our own jammers. So you now see a situation, you now find that when they use such Starlink that are perhaps procured by their masters and distributed to them here, those ones are on international network that is, in fact, even in Ukraine, Russia warfare, is difficult to intercept. The only advantage for them is that the Ukrainians have it, so that whenever any of their communication structures are destroyed by Russia, they can always rely on Starlink. So it's not, people were asking, where did Boko Haram get Starlink from? And that's one question also that we need to see how we can disable them from
You've raised a pertinent question, which I was going to ask before I went on to talk about when they go high, we go higher. The next reasonable question will be, who is sponsoring them? Who is buying these weapons or technology for them? Why can't intelligence fish them out? Because, if you don't get to the root, you're wasting your time with the leaves.
Okay, so if we are to now digress and go into that particular area, we should now be thinking about where they are being funded.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about people being funded, certainly you are talking about something bigger than what we can just imagine. So they are not only in Nigeria, a lot of people have been identified Okay, and we now see a mega kind of sponsorship that is being carried out by these people. What actually is happening is that I just gave you an example of the Starlink. They might not even have been procured in Nigeria, but brought in from outside and then distributed to them so that they can use them for communication. So what we find out is that it actually goes beyond what is within the Nigerian enclave alone. We are talking about a counter-terror action that is being led by the UN, keyed into by AU, by ECOWAS, and all the other countries that are also being, that are finding themselves under this kind of a terror situation also have to key in so that everyone can work in collaboration, and then you can now find a lasting solution to the problem. Though within Nigeria, we are aware that people have been identified and perhaps certain actions have been taken against them.
You know, that's the issue, because is it that they identified? I mean, a follow-up to that question is what the leadership in the Sahel that we're talking about, and then that of especially Nigeria, which concerns both of us and all of us here, doing, to scuttle these activities by both fishing out the sponsors, locating their foot soldiers, and wiping them out.
Okay, when we talk about the Sahel now, first of all, you talk about the G5 Sahel, and then you have the Sahel Plus, which cut across from Mauritania, Senegal, up to Eritrea. So cutting across the whole of this north central of Africa. So so there are several measures that are being taken by this, let me say, an organization I will refer to. You understand? And most of these arrangements that they make, they are also in line with what is being done globally. So like tracking of financiers, tracking of funds. Here we have the NFIU that's supposed to know who is sending what to where. But now, we now see a situation where they are trying to boycott that by going into crypto. So we now see them now using crypto to, first of all, conceal their money so that it cannot be easily traced. But then we also thank the government that certain pronouncement was made by the president recently that some measures on the control of crypto is now going to be put in place so that we can get to know who owns what, and then what amount of money are you putting in there, and several other things that we accompany that. So we also find them using things like this advanced communication. Some of them, like the one produced by Siemens. Siemens has a radio system that we were using within the UN system, such that if a patrol goes out and it stops, it is recorded on the system that the patrol has actually halted. And then you want to find out exactly what has happened to that patrol that has made it to stop. Are they refreshing? Then you need to call and find out. Or are they under any form of attack?
If we know all these things that you're saying, like I asked, why is it hard to track them, dismantle them, dislodge them, and wipe them out? If we're able, I mean, it's not just enough to know. I mean, if you know what your enemy is doing or what they are using, if you get to that extent of knowing what they're doing and what they're using, then I mean, you almost could dismantle and disorganize them. Why are we not doing that?
I think the arrival of the Americans have actually been a force multiplier for us now.
Okay.
Only today, we heard about using some some Air Force precision-guided weapons on the aircraft to dismantle about 20 ISWAP fighters. And we keep recording this regularly. It's coming in. It's not like we used to hear before that, some people have just been attacked and maybe we are suffering so number of casualties. The battle is actually taking to the adversary now, such that every information that is collated is intelligence handled, and is also translated into possible action so that we can, and I think that actually falls in line with what you are saying. A lot of, not just the information gathering system that the Nigerian forces has alone. We have those coming from the Americans also supporting this effort and making sure that it's giving some better results in acquiring targets and determining the level of devastation that is kind of battle damage as a level that is supposed to be effected on such. We talk about effect-based operations. That effect-based operations is like you have like about 50 people somewhere and you want to really impact perhaps 45, 50 level of damage on the people that have gathered with it, not just dropping bombs and you find out only 5 are killed, 10 are injured, and then about 25 others have escaped. Or something.
I mean, the question must also be asked, are we making adequate use of, I believe that when we get some of, when the military or the security agencies get some of them, like we are just showing, I mean, either prosecute, are we making real use of the information we garner for them? Because we should be able to debrief them and get real concrete information of what they're doing, their hideouts, who is. Are we doing that at all?
Okay, one thing that is very common with, you know, in the military, we say the enemy is as trained as yourself.
Is that strange?
You should assume that the enemy is as trained as yourself.
Oh, okay.
So don't assume that you have. There was a time that some, you know, our delivery of warheads into their positions, you know, they noticed that it was having some devastating effect on them. What did they do? They embarked on a kind of disperser arrangement, so that instead of you to have 2 people, about 100 people in just one enclave, they spread themselves in such a way that you have 5 here, 5 in the other corner, spreading within a radius of almost 200 meters away. And most of maybe the weapons that we are using, maybe they have a radius of like 50 meters or so, or 100. So you will not be able to effect that level of damage that you have actually planned. So we say that as the battle evolves, you have to keep tracking and monitor what the adversary is doing.
And upgrading.
Yes, and keep upgrading, because they are also not sleeping. And as long as they are not sleeping, we take maximum. In fact, okay, we will take, for example, the use of drones in Ukraine. Most of their drones are very cheap to fabricate.
Ukraine, right?
Yes, within just $500. I compare to what Americans are using in Iran, worth $20-something thousand. So you now, how do we start bringing some of these activities? I mean, some of these ideas, this technology, techno
exactly
out
what
into
I was
our
going to ask.
in such a way that we will be doing things in such a way that money will not just be wasted, and then we'll be able to take advantage of the fact that, okay, this is what tech is doing somewhere else. Can we acquire this tech know-how and then see how we can employ it here, and then we'll be able to save money within just one day. I mean, within just a space of like 1 month, Russians, Ukrainians can produce about 100,000 drones at a time. So you see the level at which they are going, and then you see them at times. We have these mass attack of drones. Like sometimes we had one attack in Wari Joko, sometimes last year. They came with 4 drones at the same time. They first of all started bombarding the place, and then the troops were repelling the attacks. Then the drones came. People scampered a little. They went into the place, took some of their items, and then they escaped.
Now that you have talked about people scattering a little, now these non-state actors, I mean, the talk is that their aim is to erode public confidence in the state authority, the state ability to be able to safeguard the people and protect the people, with serious damage to social cohesion. Are they not succeeding? The people are living in fear and don't even go about their normal businesses, as it were. Are they not succeeding? Because the people have to play a part also in helping the security agencies, to be able to tackle this. Don't you think they are succeeding in this aim or objective they have?
As one of the observation of the UN in their report is they still talk about weak governance across the areas where they are operating. But I don't think that is the situation here. And I also know that most of our territories are within the security forces that are deployed. The only thing is that most of these guys, they stay in hidden places where they come in to strike and see if they can be able to force government to take actions in some areas. For example, when you capture people, for instance, you use them to start negotiating like we experienced in the Oyo situation.
Yeah.
So, and then you, in a way, to see how you can use them to either get some of your fighters who were initially captured by our own forces. So we see some of those actions coming in. And honestly, at the rate at which we are going, I think what we actually look forward to is it may not be a complete wipeout, but then it will be such degrading on their own part that we might just be having breakaways among them coming into places to quickly attack and then they run away. And then as time goes on, we cannot say that they will be erased completely.
Yeah, but that has to happen fast because the rate at which they're going here and there. But I won't let you go without raising this issue. Ismail, the UN rapporteur, he says military operations alone won't cut it. He's urging governments to tackle the socio-economic conditions that fuel violent extremism, poverty, vulnerability. Are the authorities doing, because you just mentioned governance, are the authorities doing enough in these areas? Vulnerability, I talked about. The fact that, they try to goad people into joining them, because if people are hungry and people are poor and people can, they might buy into the ideology. Is the government doing enough in these areas?
Well, what the experience has shown us is that a lot of them are being forced. Actually, it's not as if people voluntarily want to join. When you find yourself within their enclave, you have a lot of people just want to even save their lives. And the only way you can save yourself is just to tag along with them. And in fact, most of them, there's a lot of pretension among the people who are within them who, when they have an opportunity to come out, they are ready to disclose. And like those who are in the disarmament and the reintegration I think Yobe also. Yeah. Those ones, you find that a large number of them actually were just conscripted. And they find themselves just within that circle. But then when they come out, clearly you see that when from their own declarations and whatever thing they must have, because a lot of information are being gathered from them, which are actually useful to our own troops. But again, these guys are not stable. They are not resident in one particular location where you can say, okay, tomorrow we are going to meet them here, or next tomorrow we know we have been seeing them in the one particular location for more than 2 weeks. Then it doesn't happen that way. They are always mobile, anticipating that an attack can come at any hour of the day.
Okay, General, in 1 minute, before I let you, just in 1 minute, quickly, the ungoverned spaces, are we doing enough? The far remote areas?
From what government is doing, recruiting forest guards, increasing the number of police strength, and in fact, also giving the military also enough space to add more to the number of personnel. I think within a very short time from now, a lot of places will be occupied. It will relieve one team from one area to go to another one. And then you now see a situation where, after a while, we'll be able to say certain areas are getting secured and then other areas that are yet to be secured. As more and more troops and more forest gas are produced, they keep spreading into all those areas.
That has to be hurried up to give Nigerians confidence about their security. Thank you so much, General.
All right, viewers, I thank you for coming along with me today in this particular video. Please, if you have not subscribed to Yanga Live channel, click on the subscription button, notification bell, like this video, and don't forget to share it. I am still Chinedu till I come your way next time.